They called them Dinah, Mabel, and Suke, 3 slave women meant to serve, to bow, to suffer in silence. When Overseer Harlan dragged them to the punishment shed, their bodies were broken with whips and fire, scars carved as warnings for all to see. But pain did not kill them. In the silence of the night, they slipped their chains and vanished into the swamp, bloodied, starving, but alive. What they found there was more than freedom. It was fury. Mabel's child marked for sale, Suki's rage boiling, Dinah's wisdom sharpened into strategy. From whispered plans to burning fields, they turned their torment into rebellion. 3 women the world tried to destroy, now ready to destroy the world built on their suffering. This is not just survival. This is a revolt born of torture, and nothing will stop its fire. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The cotton stretched endlessly under the merciless afternoon sun, white bowls dotting the landscape like tiny clouds fallen to earth. Dinah's weathered hands moved steadily through the rows, her fingers long accustomed to the sharp pricks of the cotton plants. Nearby, Mabel worked with quick, nervous movements, stealing glances toward the slave quarters where her baby slept. Suki's strong arms pulled at the cotton with barely contained anger, each movement a silent rebellion against their daily torment. The air was thick and still, heavy with summer heat that made sweat trickle down their backs. Around them, other slaves worked in practiced silence, the only sounds being the rustle of cotton plants and occasional clink of tools. They had been whispering together that morning, sharing what little breakfast they had, and speaking in hushed tones about things that couldn't be said aloud. The peace shattered like glass when Overseer Harlan's voice boomed across the field. "Stop your work! All of you!" His boots kicked up dust as he stormed toward them, his face red with fury. The whip at his side swung with each aggressive stride. "Someone helped Marcus escape last night," he bellowed, scanning the faces before him, "and I aim to find out who." His gaze fixed on the 3 women, who had been seen talking together near the quarters. The other workers stepped back, creating a circle of empty space around them. Harlan's hand shot out, grabbing Mabel's arm. "You 3 were mighty friendly this morning. Got something to share?" His grip tightened until she whimpered. "Please," Mabel begged, her voice trembling. "My baby needs me." "I don't know anything about—" "Shut your mouth!" Harlan backhanded her across the face. She stumbled, but didn't fall. Dinah stepped forward, her calm voice a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "Overseer Harlan, there's been a mistake. We were only sharing our morning bread. Nothing more. Save your lies, old woman," he snarled, seizing her arm as well. "Master Whitfield will hear about this." Suki's eyes flashed with defiance. "We ain't done nothing wrong," she shouted, even as rough hands grabbed her. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Harlan's face twisted with rage. He dragged them toward the punishment shed, a small wooden building that loomed like a shadow of death at the edge of the fields. Other slaves watched helplessly, their faces masks of terror and grief. They knew what happened in that shed. They'd heard the screams before. "My baby!" Mabel cried out, struggling against Harlan's grip. "Please, let me feed him first. He'll go hungry." The overseer ignored her pleas, forcing them through the shed's heavy door. The air inside was stale and thick with the metallic smell of old blood. Chains hung from the walls like iron snakes, waiting to bite into flesh. "Strip them," Harlan commanded his assistants. "Chain them up good and tight. Master Whitfield will want to handle this personally." Mabel's sobs echoed off the wooden walls as rough hands tore at their clothes. "My baby, please, my baby needs me." Dinah tried once more to reason with him, her dignity intact even as they shackled her wrists. "This won't bring Marcus back, Overseer. You're punishing innocent women." "Innocent?" Harlan laughed, the sound ugly and harsh. "There ain't no innocent slaves. You're all guilty of something. Suki fought like a wild creature, kicking and scratching until they finally subdued her. "The Lord gonna strike you down!" She spat blood from her split lip. "Every lash you give gonna come back on you tenfold!" Word spread quickly across the plantation. Slaves whispered prayers in the fields, in the kitchen, in the quarters. They knew what was coming. As the sun began to sink, Master Whitfield's carriage rolled up to the shed, gravel crunching under its wheels. The first crack of the whip split the evening air like lightning. Mabel's scream followed, high and desperate. Again and again, the whip fell, accompanied by Whitfield's angry demands for confession. Who helped Marcus escape? Tell me. Crack. Dinah's voice, usually so steady, broke into a cry of pain. Crack! Suki's defiant shouts turned to anguished screams. In the slave quarters, mothers pressed their children's faces against their breasts, trying to muffle the sounds of torture. Men clenched their fists in helpless rage. Some prayed, rocking back and forth, begging God for mercy that wouldn't come. The punishment continued as darkness fell. The whip's terrible rhythm punctuated by questions that went unanswered. Blood ran down the women's backs, dripping onto the shed's dirt floor. Their screams grew hoarser, weaker, but didn't stop. Mabel's baby wailed in the quarters, hungry for his mother's milk. The sound carried across the plantation, mixing with the crack of the whip and his mother's cries. No one dared to move, to help, to intervene. They could only listen as night settled over the plantation like a heavy blanket, unable to smother the sounds of suffering from the punishment shed. The air grew thick with the metallic smell of blood and the acrid stench of fear. Through it all, the three women's spirits refused to break. Even as their bodies failed them, their silence was a testimony to their strength. They would not betray Marcus, wherever he had run. Whether he had made it to freedom or already been caught, his absence had become their silent vow. They would suffer before giving his name, would not give Whitfield the satisfaction of a confession. Later, whispers would drift through the quarters. Some swore Marcus crossed the river under moonlight. Others said the dogs found a body by the marsh. Either way, their silence had mattered. Their shared pain became a terrible bond, stronger than the iron that held them. In the darkness, their suffering became a horrible symphony. The whistle of the whip, the impact of leather on flesh, the crack that followed, and the screams that pierced the night. The other slaves lay awake in their beds. Each crack of the whip felt like a blow to their own bodies, each scream a knife in their hearts. They knew that, but for chance, it could have been any of them chained in that shed. The morning sun crept through the cracks of the punishment shed, revealing 3 broken bodies hanging from iron chains. Dried blood had turned black against their skin, creating terrible patterns across their backs. Dinah's head hung low, her gray-streaked hair matted with sweat and blood. Beside her, Mabel's chest barely moved with each shallow breath. Suki's usually defiant face was swollen, one eye sealed shut from the beating. Flies buzzed around their wounds, landing on torn flesh despite weak attempts to shake them off. 2 guards lounged by the door, passing a water flask between them, deliberately letting drops spill to the dirt floor. "Look at them now," one guard sneered, tobacco juice staining his chin. "Not so proud today, are they?" "Especially that one," the other pointed at Suke. "Always running her mouth. Bet she ain't feeling so bold now." Suke's good eye fixed on them with hatred, but she remained silent. Speaking meant moving her cracked lips, and even that small motion brought waves of pain. The door creaked open, letting in a blast of hot air. Overseer Harlan strutted in, carrying a metal rod with a glowing orange tip. The smell of heated iron filled the small space. Behind him, Master Whitfield entered, his fine coat out of place in the filthy shed. "Still no confession?" Whitfield asked, his voice eerily calm. When no one answered, he nodded to Harlan. Perhaps they need more convincing. Harlan approached Suke, holding the branding iron near her face. The heat made her skin prickle, sweat running down her neck. "Ready to tell us about Marcus?" he asked, moving the iron closer until she could feel her skin beginning to blister. Suki closed her eye, turning her face away. Her chains rattled with her trembling, but she pressed her lips together, refusing to speak. "Leave her be!" Dinah's voice cracked. "She knows nothing about—" Harlan spun around, pressing the hot iron against the wall inches from Dinah's face. The wood sizzled and smoked. "You'll speak when spoken to, old woman." Whitfield paced the small space, his boots leaving prints in the blood-stained dirt. "I've been too lenient," he mused. "Perhaps seeing each other suffer will loosen your tongues." He pointed at Mabel. "Start with that one. Make the others watch." 2 guards unchained Mabel, who collapsed immediately. They dragged her to the center of the shed, holding her up by her arms. Her head lolled forward, dark hair hiding her face. "No," Dinah pleaded, pulling against her chains. "She's just a young mother. Her baby needs her." "Then tell me what I want to know," Whitfield replied coldly. When no answer came, he nodded to Harlan. The overseer's whip cracked across Mabel's already shredded back. She jerked, but didn't scream. She had no voice left for screaming. Dinah and Suki were forced to watch as lash after lash fell. Mabel's blood splattered their faces. Finally, her body went completely limp, consciousness fleeing from the pain. "String her back up," Whitfield ordered. "No food or water until someone talks." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Harlan. Make sure everyone on the plantation can hear them during the next session. It's important to remind the others what happens to those who defy me." The guards chained Mabel's unconscious form back to the wall. Her head hung at an awkward angle, blood dripping steadily from her mouth where she'd bitten through her lip. Hours passed, in a haze of pain and thirst. The women drifted in and out of consciousness, their parched throats too dry even for whispers. The afternoon heat turned the shed into an oven, their sweat mixing with blood. During a moment of clarity, Dinah caught Suki's eye. Her lips moved silently. "Stay strong, child." Suki managed a tiny nod. Her one good eye shifted to Mabel's still form, concern evident in her gaze. As if sensing their attention, Mabel stirred slightly. Her chains clinked as she tried to lift her head. "My babe," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Is anyone feeding my baby?" "Hush now," Dinah murmured. "Save your strength. The Lord sees our suffering. He won't abandon us." Another endless day faded into night. The guards changed shifts, their heavy boots scraping against the wooden floor. The new guards were younger, more nervous. They stayed outside the shed, their low conversation and occasional laughter drifting through the walls. Deep in the night, when even the insects had gone quiet, a different sound caught their attention, the softest scrape of careful footsteps. The door eased open just enough for a shadow to slip inside. Clara, one of the house servants, moved like a ghost across the dirt floor. Her dark eyes were wide with fear, darting between the women and the door. In her trembling hands, she held a tin cup of water and a small piece of bread. "Quickly," she whispered, holding the cup first to Dinah's cracked lips. The water was warm, but felt like heaven sliding down her throat. Clara moved to Suki next, then Mabel, letting each woman drink. "Bless you, child," Dinah breathed. Clara pressed the piece of bread into Dinah's hand, her finger touching something hard hidden inside. "Be careful," she mouthed silently, glancing nervously at the door. Suki's good eye widened in understanding. Something sharp lay buried in that bread. A tool, a chance, a hope. Before any of them could speak again, voices approached from outside. Clara vanished as silently as she had come, taking the tin cup with her. The door opened moments later as a guard checked inside, his lantern casting suspicious shadows across the walls. Finding nothing amiss, he closed the door again. Footsteps passed again in the hall. Caleb, the house servant who kept close to Whitfield's ear, pausing as if to listen, then moving on. Dinah filed the name away without knowing why. In the darkness, Dinah's fingers carefully closed around the bread, feeling the hard shape within. She couldn't risk examining it yet, but its presence felt like a burning coal of hope in her palm. The women hung in silence, their pain momentarily overshadowed by the weight of what had just happened. Someone still cared. Someone still dared to help. In the deep of night, that knowledge became a quiet flame, warming their broken spirits as they waited for whatever morning would bring. The night pressed heavy and thick around the punishment shed. Only the chorus of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl broke the darkness. Dinah's fingers trembled as she carefully picked apart the hardened bread crust, her heart thundering so loud she feared the guards would hear it. When her fingertips touched something cold and metal, she had to bite back a gasp. "What is it?" Suki whispered, her voice barely a breath. Dinah worked the object free, a small metal file, its rough edge catching the faintest moonlight through the shed's cracks. Hope and terror warred in her chest. Discovery would mean death, but the file represented their only chance at freedom. "Here," she breathed, stretching her arm as far as the chains allowed, passing the tool to Suke. "Your hands are stronger than mine." Suke's good eye widened as she felt the file's weight. She immediately pressed it against the weakest link in her chains, the metal-on-metal scrape impossibly loud in the quiet shed. They all froze, listening for any reaction from the guards. "Slower," Dinah advised. "We have until dawn." Mabel stirred, lifting her head slightly. Let me help," she mumbled. "Save your strength," Dinah told her. "You'll need it soon enough." Suke worked methodically, using her body to muffle the sound. Every few minutes, she would pause, letting the night sounds cover their actions. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air, her arm trembling from the effort. A board creaked outside. The file disappeared into Suki's hand as heavy boots approached. They hung limply in their chains, feigning unconsciousness as the guard peered through a gap in the wall. Long seconds passed before his footsteps retreated. "Lord protect us," Dinah prayed softly, her eyes squeezed shut. Hours crept by. Suki's progress was agonizingly slow, but steady. The chain's link grew thinner, weaker. Near midnight, a sharp snap made them all jump. The first chain had broken. Suki kept her arms raised, mimicking the chain's position while she worked on the second restraint. Her shoulders burned from the strain, but determination kept her moving. The second chain took less time. Her technique improved. Finally free, Suke crouched in the darkness, massaging feeling back into her wrists. She moved to Dinah next, working twice as fast now that she had better mobility. The old woman's chains fell away within an hour. Mabel proved the most difficult. Her unconscious slumping had pulled her chains tight, making them harder to reach. Suki had to stand on trembling legs, balancing carefully to reach the links. Dawn was approaching by the time the last chain broke. "The wall," Dinah whispered, crawling on hands and knees to examine the shed's base. Years of rain and rot had weakened the lowest planks. She pressed against one, feeling it give slightly. Suki joined her, adding her strength. The wood groaned softly as they worked it back and forth. Splinters dug into their palms, but they didn't stop. Finally, a section roughly 2 feet wide pulled free. Cool night air rushed in through the gap. Freedom's scent, earth and water and growing things, brought tears to their eyes. Dinah went first, her thin frame sliding through easily. She helped guide Mabel, who could barely move under her own power. Suki came last, carefully replacing the board behind them. They crouched in the shadows, letting their eyes adjust to the darkness. The slave quarters lay silent to their right, the big house a looming shadow ahead. Behind them stretched the swamp, dark and forbidding. A dog barked somewhere near the stables. Another answered from closer by. The women froze, barely breathing. "The swamp," Dinah mouthed silently, pointing to the darkness beyond the fields. It was their only chance. Dogs couldn't track them through water, and the thick mud would hide their blood trail. They half crawled, half staggered through the cotton rows, using the plants for cover. Every rustle sounded like an alarm. Every shadow held potential death. Mabel stumbled, and Suki caught her before she fell. Together, they helped her forward. The barking grew louder, more excited. The dogs had caught their scent. "Faster!" Suki urged, though her own legs shook with exhaustion. They reached the swamp's edge just as shouts erupted from the direction of the shed. Their absence had been discovered. Lantern light bloomed behind them as guards emerged from their posts. Without hesitation, the women plunged into the dark water. The mud sucked at their feet, threatening to pull them under. They pushed forward, staying low, using cypress knees and fallen logs to pull themselves along. The water rose to their waists, then their chests. The dogs' barking echoed across the water, accompanied by cursing and the splash of horses entering the swamp. Dinah led them deeper in, following a barely visible path between the cypress trees. Moonlight turned the Spanish moss into pale ghosts above them. Dawn began to stain the eastern sky pink. The patrol riders were closer now, their horses struggling through the muck. One passed within 20 feet of where the women huddled behind a fallen tree. But the murky water and shadows kept them hidden. They couldn't have gone far in their condition. A voice called, "Spread out and keep searching." The women stayed absolutely still as hooves splashed past. Mabel's breathing was shallow and rapid. She was burning with fever. Suki held her up, keeping her face above water while Dinah watched the riders through the reeds. Slowly, the search moved away from them. The dogs' barking grew distant, confused by the water's maze of scents. Still, the women didn't move. They had learned patience in their chains, now that patience might save their lives. The sun crept higher, burning away the morning mist. They found a patch of higher ground screened by thick cattails and collapsed there, their bodies finally giving in to exhaustion. The mud covered their wounds, cooling the torn flesh. Every breath hurt, but each one was a breath of freedom. Hidden in their reed fortress, they listened as horses passed nearby again. Dinah squeezed Mabel's hand, feeling a weak squeeze in return. Suki's one good eye remained fixed on the path they'd taken, watching for pursuit. They had escaped their chains, but survival would require more strength than they had ever needed before. As morning fully arrived, they lay silent and still, 3 shadows among the cattails, waiting for their chance to move deeper into the swamp's protection. The late morning sun beat down mercilessly as the 3 women stumbled through the swamp. Their wounds had stiffened, making each step agony. Mabel's fever burned hotter, and she leaned heavily on Suki's shoulder. Dinah led the way, though her vision blurred from exhaustion and hunger. "Rest," Suki whispered, helping Mabel sink down onto a fallen log. Just for a moment. The air felt different here, lighter somehow, with an unfamiliar scent mixing with the swamp's usual decay. Dinah's nose twitched. "Smoke," she murmured, suddenly alert. Through the trees ahead, a thin tendril of gray rose into the sky. Hope and fear warred in their hearts. Smoke meant people, but who? They had heard whispers of Maroon camps hidden in the swamps, communities of escaped slaves living free. But they had also heard tales of those who betrayed their own kind for reward money. "We have to chance it," Dinah decided, seeing how Mabel's head lolled. "She needs help." They moved forward cautiously, using the cypress trees for cover. The smoke led them to a clearing, surprisingly dry and well hidden among the surrounding wetlands. Small huts made of branches and palm fronds circled a central fire pit. Before they could step into the open, dark figures materialized from the shadows. Strong hands grabbed them, pulling them apart. Spears and knives glinted in the filtered sunlight. The women were too weak to resist as they were dragged into the clearing. "Who are you?" a deep voice demanded. An older man stepped forward, his graying hair wrapped in a faded red cloth. He carried himself with authority, studying them through narrowed eyes. "Please," Dinah spoke first, her voice rough from thirst. "We escaped from Whitfield's plantation last night. We need help." Murmurs rippled through the gathered Maroons. The old man, clearly their leader, frowned deeper. "Whitfield's? That's 10 miles from here. You expect us to believe 3 beaten women made that journey overnight?" "We had no choice," Suki shot back, some of her old fire returning. "Better to die free in the swamp than live another day in chains." "Pretty words," the leader said, "the kind a spy might use to gain trust. I am Jonas, and these people are my responsibility. I cannot risk their safety on pretty words." Dinah straightened as much as her injuries allowed. Without speaking, she turned and pulled up what remained of her shirt, exposing her back. Gasps rose from the crowd. The lash marks were fresh and cruel, crossing older scars in a brutal lattice. Suke thrust out her arms, showing the angry red burns where the overseer had pressed the hot iron. "Is this proof enough?" she demanded. But it was Mabel who finally swayed them. She had been silent until now, barely conscious. Suddenly she looked up, tears cutting clean trails through the mud on her face. "My baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Little boy. I had to leave him behind. He's all alone. Please, please help us." Something in Jonas's stern expression softened. He had seen too many mothers separated from their children not to recognize genuine pain. He gestured to a woman nearby. "Sarah, tend to their wounds. Give them water and food." The next hours passed in a blur as gentle hands cleaned their injuries, spread healing poultices over the worst damage. They drank deep from gourds of fresh water and ate simple corn cakes that tasted better than any feast. Mabel's fever began to break under Sarah's careful ministrations. As evening approached, they sat close to the fire, wrapped in borrowed blankets. The camp moved around them, people going about their daily tasks. Children played in the shadows while women prepared the evening meal. Men returned from hunting, carrying fish and waterfowl. It was a life they had never imagined possible. Free people living on their own terms. Jonas sat with his advisors on the other side of the fire, speaking in low voices. The women weren't trying to eavesdrop, but the wind carried fragments of conversation to them. Messenger from the plantation, Whitfield's planning something, slave auction in Charleston, end of the month. Children mostly, better price for the young ones. Mabel's whole body went rigid. Dinah grabbed her hand, squeezing tight, as Jonas's words became clearer. "He's selling off at least 20 of them. Young ones, strong ones, including that baby belonging to the woman who escaped. Probably punishment for his mother running." The fire's warmth couldn't touch the cold that settled over them. Mabel's fingers dug into Dinah's palm, her breath coming in short gasps. Suki's face hardened into a mask of fury. They had found safety, but at what cost? The very thing Mabel had feared most, losing her child, was about to happen. Their escape hadn't just endangered themselves, but had sealed the fate of those left behind. The sounds of the camp continued around them, cooking fires crackling, children laughing, people living their free lives. But for the 3 women huddled by the fire, a new weight settled onto their shoulders. They had escaped their chains only to face an even harder choice: remain safe in their newfound freedom, or risk everything to save the ones they'd left behind. Dawn crept through the cypress trees, painting the Maroon camp in soft gray light. Mabel stirred first, her body aching from sleeping on the hard ground. Around her, early risers tended cooking fires, the smell of cornmeal and wild herbs drifting through the morning air. Birds called to each other in the canopy above, their songs mixing with the quiet conversations of the camp's residents. Dinah sat nearby, already awake, watching the camp with thoughtful eyes. Suke lay curled on her side, her face twisted in troubled sleep. The night's revelations had haunted all their dreams. "I have to go back," Mabel said softly, her voice rough with emotion. "I can't let them sell my boy." Dinah reached over, taking Mabel's trembling hand. "Child, you're barely healed. The overseers will be watching harder than ever." "I don't care." Mabel's fingers tightened around Dinah's. "He's all I have. I promised I'd always protect him." Their voices roused Suke, who pushed herself up with a grimace. Her burns had scabbed over, but still pulled painfully at her skin. "Then we fight," she declared, her eyes bright with familiar fire. "Fight?" Dinah frowned. "Against rifles and dogs? With what weapons?" "With whatever we can find." Suke gestured at the camp around them. "These people have survived here for years. They know how to defend themselves, and there are more of us than there are of them. Always have been. We just never had the courage to see it before." A young woman approached with wooden bowls of steaming porridge, setting them down before quickly retreating. The three ate in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "They hurt us," Suki continued between mouthfuls, her voice low and intense. "Tortured us. And now they want to tear children from their mother's arms? No. I say we go back and end it." "All of it." Mabel nodded slowly, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "I'd rather die fighting for my child than live knowing I abandoned him." Dinah set her empty bowl aside, studying her companions. The wise part of her, the part that had survived so long by being careful, urged caution. But something else stirred in her chest, a rage long buried, fed by years of witnessing suffering she could not prevent. "If we do this," she said carefully, "we need more than just courage. We need a plan. Numbers. Weapons. Then let's ask them." Suki nodded toward where Jonas sat with his advisors, sharing a morning meal. "They know how to fight, how to move unseen. They could help us." The women approached the Maroon leaders, who fell silent at their coming. Jonas looked up, his weathered face unreadable. "We need to talk," Dinah said, taking the lead. "About what we heard last night." Jonas sighed heavily. "I wondered if you were listening." "Sit." They settled around the remains of the cooking fire, steam rising from cups of chicory coffee. Dinah explained their intention to return, to stop the sale and free as many as they could. "Impossible!" one of Jonas's advisors spat. "You'll bring the militia down on all our heads." "Not if we're smart," Suki argued. "Not if we plan it right." "How many weapons do you have here? How many would fight?" "This isn't your concern anymore," Jonas said firmly. "You're free now. Head north while you can." "My baby is there," Mabel's voice cracked. "And other mothers' babies, too. How can you ask us to abandon them?" "Because I've seen what happens when revolt fails," Jonas snapped. "I've watched good people hang. Watched children die in their mother's arms anyway." Silence fell heavy around the fire. In the distance, a hawk screamed, and something crashed through the underbrush. "Then teach us," Dinah said quietly. "Show us how to succeed where others failed. You've survived here for years. You know the land, the ways to move unseen. Help us do this right." Jonas studied her for a long moment. "You were their midwife, weren't you? I remember hearing about you. They say you have healing hands." "Yes. And I've watched too many children born into chains, watched too many die before they could taste freedom." Dinah met his gaze steadily. "Help us break those chains." The old man looked around at his people, men and women who had fought their way to freedom, who lived every day with the knowledge that they might have to fight again. Some nodded slowly. Others looked away. "It would take time," Jonas said finally. "Planning, training. You're not strong enough yet to hold a weapon, let alone use one. We have until the end of the month, Suki reminded him. Time enough to heal. Time enough to learn. Jonas stood abruptly, pacing the width of the clearing. The others watched in tense silence as he wrestled with the decision. Finally, he turned back to them. 3 days, he said. 3 days to regain your strength. Then we'll see what you can learn. He gestured to one of his men, who disappeared into a nearby hut. The man returned carrying rough weapons, wooden spears tipped with iron, crude knives fashioned from stolen tools. For now, these will do for practice. Jonas took up one of the spears, testing its weight. When you're ready, I'll show you the hidden trails that lead back to the plantation. Places to watch without being seen. Hope and fear mingled in the women's hearts as they accepted the weapons. The wood felt strange in their hands, tools of violence instead of labor. But as the weight settled in their palms, something else settled in their spirits. A certainty. A purpose. The camp stirred around them, coming fully awake as the sun climbed higher. Children darted between the huts. Women carried water from the stream. Men prepared for the day's hunting. Life continuing as it had for years in this hidden pocket of freedom. But for Dinah, Mabel, and Suke, everything had changed. They were no longer just escapees seeking refuge. They were becoming something else. Something their masters had always feared. Warriors. Jonas began leading them toward a cleared space at the edge of camp, weapons in hand. The first lesson was about to begin. Moonless clouds shrouded the plantation in darkness as Dinah, Mabel, and Suki crept through the thick underbrush toward the slave quarters. 2 weeks of training with Jonas had taught them to move like shadows, their feet finding silent purchase even among dry leaves. Dogs barked somewhere near the main house, making them freeze until the sound faded. "Remember," Dinah whispered, barely audible, "we speak only to those we trust completely. One wrong word to the wrong person." Suke nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "We know who'll stand with us. Who's got fire in their belly instead of fear?" Mabel said nothing, her thoughts already racing toward her baby. Her arms ached to hold him. They paused at the edge of the tree line, studying the familiar shapes of the slave quarters. Oil lamps flickered in a few windows, but most were dark. The night air hung heavy with summer heat, carrying the musty scent of unwashed bodies packed too tight in small cabins. Dinah touched each woman's shoulder, a silent signal. They separated, each heading for different sections of the quarters. They had planned this carefully. Who to approach first? What words to use? How to plant the seeds of rebellion without raising alarm? Dinah moved toward the cabin where old Joseph lived with his grandchildren. The eldest slaves respected his wisdom, looked to him for guidance. If he could be convinced, others would follow. She rapped softly on his window. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. The pattern they'd used since her escape to identify friends. The window creaked open. "Who's there?" Joseph's voice trembled. "It's Dinah," she breathed. "I've returned with hope." A sharp intake of breath. "Child, we thought you dead. Let me in, Joseph. There's much to discuss." The door opened just wide enough for her to slip inside. Joseph's cabin smelled of tobacco and dried herbs, familiar and comforting. His grandchildren slept in the corner, their breathing steady. "You're playing with fire," Joseph warned as they settled on low stools. "The master's been wild since you escaped. More beatings, more threats. Then it's time we put out his fire with our own." Dinah leaned close, her voice passionate but controlled. "We have friends in the swamps, Joseph. Strong people, free people. They'll help us fight." "Fight?" The word seemed to choke him. "That's madness. Madness is watching our children sold like cattle. Madness is living in fear while they break our bodies and spirits." She gripped his weathered hands. "You remember when they sold your daughter? Your Mary." Joseph's face crumpled. "Not a day passes I don't think of her." Help us make sure no more fathers lose their daughters. No more mothers lose their sons. Across the quarters, Suki moved with different purpose. She sought out the young men who worked the fields, whose muscles were strong and whose hearts burned hot with hatred for the overseers. She found them gathered behind the tool shed, passing a stolen jug of whiskey. "Look what the swamp sent back," one whispered as she approached. Suki settled among them, her presence electric. "I've seen freedom," she said without preamble. "Tasted it. Lived with people who answer to no master." The men leaned closer, hunger in their eyes. She told them of the Maroon camp, of weapons and training, of dignity reclaimed. With each word, she stoked the embers of their rage into flame. "We've got numbers," she pressed. "We've got strength they don't suspect. All we lack is courage." "Courage won't stop bullets," someone muttered. Suki's smile was sharp in the darkness. "No, but strategy will. Planning will. And we have both." Meanwhile, Mabel's heart pounded as she approached her old cabin. Light still burned inside. Sarah, who shared the space, often worked late mending clothes for extra food. Mabel hesitated, then knocked softly. Sarah's gasp of recognition nearly gave them away. "Lord, have mercy," she breathed, pulling Mabel inside. "Your baby's been crying for you something fierce." Mabel rushed to the crude cradle where her son lay sleeping. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stroked his soft curls, breathed in his sweet scent. "Have they treated him well?" "As best we could," Sarah assured her. "But the master's been talking about selling the children, getting rid of trouble before it starts." Sarah lowered her voice. "And Caleb's been running messages to the big house every chance he gets, likes to be seen doing it. That's why I'm here." Mabel straightened, though her hand stayed on her child. "We're planning something, Sarah. Something big, but we need help. People we can trust. People willing to risk everything for freedom." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. "You're talking about revolt? I'm talking about justice, about making sure my boy grows up free." Mabel untied her headscarf, tearing off a strip. "Will you stand with us?" Sarah watched as Mabel tied the cloth to the cradle. A promise, a signal, a commitment to return. After a long moment, she nodded. "Tell me what you need." As the night deepened, the women's whispered words spread like fire through dry grass. Each carefully chosen conversation sparked another, passed in secret between trusted friends and family. Hope mingled with fear, determination with doubt. The air grew thick with possibility. Finally, the three women regrouped at their meeting spot behind the tool shed. No words were needed. Their eyes told of success, of purpose achieved. They melted back into the shadows, moving as one toward the safety of the swamp. Behind them, the master's mansion glowed with lamplight, its windows bright against the dark sky. Music drifted from the house, the master hosting yet another evening of entertainment, unaware of the storm brewing beneath his feet. The women paused at the tree line, looking back one last time at the symbol of their oppression. The lights flickered, like candles guttering in a wind they couldn't yet feel. Sweat trickled down Dinah's back as she watched Jonas demonstrate another defensive stance. The humid afternoon air hung thick in the Maroon camp, making every movement feel like swimming through soup. Around her, 24 men gripped rough-hewn spears, copying the elders' precise movements. "Again!" Jonas commanded, his voice firm but quiet. "The thrust must be quick, decisive. You hesitate, you die." The spears moved in unison, stabbing invisible enemies. Dinah noticed how the men's coordination had improved over the past weeks. What began as clumsy farmers now resembled something closer to warriors. Nearby, Suke supervised a group of women sharpening tools into weapons. The steady scrape of stone against metal created a rhythm that matched the spear drills. Kitchen knives gained wicked edges. Scythes meant for cutting sugarcane were transformed into curved blades of vengeance. Mabel worked silently among them, her hands steady as she tested each edge. Since leaving her baby behind, she'd grown harder, more focused. The promise tied to his cradle seemed to drive every movement she made. The blade should sing, Suki instructed, demonstrating with a freshly sharpened knife. The metal made a high whistle as it cut through air. If it doesn't sing, it's not ready. Jonas called a break as the sun climbed higher. The fighters gathered under the shade of cypress trees, passing water gourds and speaking in low voices. Dinah joined the Maroon elder, noting the lines of worry creasing his weathered face. "They're learning fast," she said quietly. Jonas nodded. "They have to. We can't afford mistakes." He wiped sweat from his brow. But fighting isn't just about weapons. It's about trust, coordination. One person breaks, everything falls apart. "We trust each other," Dinah assured him. "Every person here has suffered under the Master's whip. Every person here has lost someone. That's what worries me." Jonas's eyes swept over the gathered rebels. Hatred can make people reckless. Revenge can make them blind. Before Dinah could respond, a scout rushed into camp. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons, but the scout's signal indicated friendly news. He carried messages from their allies, still working the plantation, coded words sewn into patches on his shirt. Suki and Mabel joined them as they decoded the intelligence. The Master planned a grand party in 2 weeks, when the moon would be dark. Many neighboring plantation owners would attend. The house would be full of wine, music, and distraction. Another message warned that Whitfield had ordered the smallest children moved to the big house for safekeeping. The infants kept near the nursery so nurses could quiet them during the festivities. "Perfect timing," Suki breathed, her eyes gleaming. "They'll be drunk on their own importance." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of preparation. Every detail had to be perfect. Every person had to know their role. The women emerged as natural leaders, each in their own way. Dinah became the voice of strategy, working with Jonas to coordinate between the Maroons and plantation allies. Her knowledge of healing helped her teach others how to treat wounds, which plants could stop bleeding or ease pain. The others looked to her for guidance, trusting her calm wisdom. Suke's fire inspired the younger fighters. She taught them to channel their anger into discipline, showing how rage could sharpen focus instead of clouding it. Under her instruction, they learned to move silently through the swamp, to throw knives with deadly accuracy, to turn farm tools into weapons of war. Mabel's quiet strength drew people's confidence. She organized the complex network of messages between conspirators, creating simple codes that even children could carry without suspicion. She knew every family involved, every hiding place, every escape route. Messages passed in secret ways, symbols scratched on trees, colored cloth tied to fence posts, songs sung in the fields that carried hidden meaning. Women braided their hair in patterns that signaled readiness. Men positioned tools in specific ways to mark safe meeting spots. The plantation itself became a silent map of rebellion. Weapons were cached in hollow trees and beneath rotting logs. Supplies were gathered slowly. Bandages, food, medicine. Every night, more slaves slipped away to train with the Maroons, returning before dawn with aching muscles and hardened resolve. Not everyone could be trusted. The women carefully watched for signs of weakness or betrayal. Those deemed uncertain were kept ignorant, fed false information, or watched closely. The weight of secrets hung heavy, but necessity demanded caution. Training intensified as the days counted down. Jonas drove them harder, drilling fighting formations late into the night. The women supervised every aspect, Dinah coordinating medical preparations, Suki refining combat techniques, Mabel ensuring communication remained secure. The night before the new moon, the camp buzzed with tense energy. Final preparations were made in near total silence. Weapons were distributed, positions assigned, signals confirmed one last time. Everyone knew that come tomorrow, there would be no turning back. As darkness fell on the appointed evening, rebels gathered at designated points around the plantation's edge. The women stood at the border of the cane fields, torches ready but unlit. The humid air pressed close, carrying the sweet rot smell of sugar cane and the distant sound of violins from the master's house. Dinah felt the weight of her torch, smooth wood against calloused palms. Beside her, Suki vibrated with controlled energy, while Mabel stood stone still, her eyes fixed on the grand house where celebration lights blazed. Other figures crouched in the darkness around them, familiar shadows armed with sharpened purpose. They waited in perfect silence, every sense straining for the signal. The music from the house grew louder as more guests arrived. The night creatures of the swamp called to each other, covering the sound of shifting feet and nervous breathing. Still, they waited. The night hung thick and heavy over the plantation, crickets singing their endless chorus in the darkness. Dinah's hands trembled slightly as she struck flint against steel, sparks flying in the humid air. The torch caught, flames leaping up to illuminate the determined faces around her. One by one, more torches blazed to life, held high like beacons of vengeance. Suke's face glowed fierce in the firelight as she raised her torch. "Now," she whispered harshly. The word passed from mouth to mouth, rippling through the shadows like wind through grass. They moved as one, a tide of righteous fury flowing from the cane fields. Their feet, so long trained to silence, thundered against the earth. The first overseer barely had time to shout before an axe split his skull. His body crumpled as rebels swarmed past, weapons glinting in the torchlight. Dinah watched Suki sprint toward the barn, torch held high. The dry wood caught quickly, flames racing up the walls. Horses screamed inside, their panic adding to the chaos. The fire cast wild shadows across the yard as slaves poured from their quarters, some carrying weapons, others helping the elderly and children. "This way," Dinah called, guiding a group of women carrying babies toward the swamp trails. Her voice stayed steady even as clashes erupted around them. The knowledge of escape routes, drilled into memory over weeks of planning, now proved vital. She pointed them toward hidden paths where Maroon allies waited to lead them to safety. Near the main house, overseers and house servants loyal to the master tried to mount a defense, but they found themselves surrounded. Years of cruelty repaid in swift, brutal moments. The weapons that had been carefully sharpened sang their deadly songs, just as Suke had taught. Mabel darted through the chaos, dodging between fighting groups. Her focus was singular, reaching the nursery where her baby should be sleeping. She'd memorized every creaking floorboard, every shadow where guards might hide. But as she burst through the door, her heart stopped. The cradle stood empty, her marker cloth torn away. Inside the mansion, the party had devolved into terror. Fine ladies in silk dresses screamed as slaves they'd ordered about for years now crashed through windows and doors. Their husbands fumbled with pistols, but close quarters made the weapons nearly useless against determined attackers with knives and axes. Suki led a group of younger men up the main staircase, their feet thundering on polished wood. They'd trained for this, rehearsed every turn and doorway. Master Whitfield's study door splintered under their combined assault, but the master himself was nowhere to be found. The flames from the barn had spread to nearby buildings. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and throats. It provided perfect cover for Dinah's groups of escapees, who melted into the darkness beyond the firelight. She worked methodically, directing people to safety while keeping watch for militia reinforcement. Mabel tore through the house, desperation mounting with each empty room. "Where is he?" she screamed at a cowering house servant. "Where's my baby?" The woman pointed toward the kitchen with trembling hands. Mabel ran, her heart pounding against her ribs. The fighting grew more intense as trusted house slaves joined the overseers. choosing the master's side over their own people. Brother fought brother in the hallways, while outside the crackle of flames mixed with shouts and screams of the wounded. Dinah found herself treating injuries even in the midst of battle, applying pressure to wounds and barking instructions to helpers. Her healer's hands remained steady, though her heart raced at every horn blast or cry of alarm. They'd known there would be casualties. She just prayed their losses would be few. Suki's rage found its target in the overseer's quarters. Harlan had barricaded himself inside, firing shots through the windows. But they'd prepared for this, too. Smoke bombs made from dried peppers forced him out, coughing and cursing. He died as he'd lived, violently, his own whip wrapped around his throat. The grand house, symbol of the master's power, began to burn. Flames licked up curtains and devoured fine furniture. Paintings of proud ancestors curled and blackened in the heat. The very walls that had witnessed so much suffering now crumbled in righteous fire. Mabel's search grew more frantic as smoke filled the lower floors. She found signs of hasty packing in the kitchen. Food gathered quickly. Blankets missing. Had they taken her baby as a hostage? The thought drove her to a new level of fury. Hours that felt like minutes passed. The fighting began to die down as the sun's first rays painted the smoke-filled sky in shades of blood and gold. Slaves who'd chosen to stay behind secured the remaining buildings, while others led their families to freedom. Dinah, Suki, and Mabel found each other near the burning mansion. They stood together, watching flames consume the symbol of their oppression. Their clothes were stained with soot and blood, their faces streaked with sweat and tears. Victory tasted like ash in their mouths, sweet but bitter. The first notes of militia horns echoed from the direction of town, carried on the morning breeze. Help was coming for the masters, too late to save their property, but soon enough to threaten their hard-won freedom. The women exchanged glances, knowing their fight was far from over. Dawn painted the sky in fierce colors, smoke rising like a signal of revolution. The grand house that had dominated their lives for so long now collapsed in on itself, timbers groaning like dying beasts. Around them lay the wreckage of their uprising, bodies of friends and foes, overturned carriages, scattered weapons, and burning buildings. The sun crept above the horizon, painting streaks of orange and red across the smoke-filled sky. Dinah led their group through familiar swamp trails, her legs trembling with exhaustion from the night's battle. Behind her, a ragged line of freed slaves and Maroon fighters picked their way through the muck, weapons still gripped tight in weary hands. Suki brought up the rear, constantly glancing back for signs of pursuit. Her torch had burned out hours ago, but she still clutched it like a club. Blood, not all of it belonging to others, had dried in dark patches on her dress. Her breath came in harsh gasps, matching the labored breathing of those around her. Mabel walked in silence, her eyes vacant and red-rimmed. The empty cradle haunted her thoughts. Each step away from the plantation felt like another betrayal of her child, though she knew staying would have meant death. Her fingers kept touching the torn piece of cloth from his blanket, now tucked safely in her pocket. The morning air hung thick with humidity, making their clothes stick to sweaty skin. Insects buzzed around them, drawn by the smell of blood and sweat. The sounds of their passage, splashing feet, cracking twigs, and occasional moans of pain, seemed impossibly loud in the dawn stillness. "Rest here," Dinah commanded, as they reached a small rise above the swamp waters. 10 minutes only. Drink if you have water. Bind any wounds that are still bleeding. Her voice carried the same quiet authority it had held when she delivered babies or tended the sick, though now it served a darker purpose. Jonas appeared from the shadows of the cypress trees, his face grave. He gestured for the 3 women to join him away from the others. The old Maroon leader's movements were stiff, his own night of fighting evident in how he favored his right leg. "Someone warned them we were coming," he said, without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. The militia didn't just respond to the fires, they were ready, waiting. Suki's hand tightened on her makeshift weapon. "Who?" she demanded, though the word came out more like a growl. "One of the house servants," Jonas replied. "Must have been. They knew too much. Our timing, our escape routes, even—" Jonas's jaw worked. "Landmarks, too." Caleb described the 3 bent cypresses and the lightning-struck oak. "They cut straight across, like they'd walked our paths for years." He hesitated, looking at Mabel with sympathy in his tired eyes. "Even what?" Mabel asked, her voice hollow. "Even that we'd try to get the children first. That's why they moved them. Why they took your boy." Mabel swayed on her feet. Dinah caught her arm, steadying her, though her own face had gone ashen at the news. The betrayal cut deep. They had trusted their own people, believed their shared suffering would bind them together against the masters. A horn blast shattered the morning quiet, much closer than before. Birds erupted from the trees, their wings beating a frantic rhythm against the sky. Jonas cursed, a rare break in his usual stoic demeanor. "They're not following the road," he said quickly. "They're cutting straight through the swamp. They know our paths." Before anyone could respond, gunfire erupted from the direction of the Maroon camp. Screams followed. Women's voices, children's cries. The sound of military drums joined the chaos, much too near. "They're attacking the camp!" Suki started forward, but Jonas grabbed her arm. "It's already too late," he said grimly. "They've had hours to position their men. We have to." More gunfire interrupted him. Through gaps in the trees, they could see figures running, Maroons fleeing the camp, Militia in close pursuit. The morning mist made it hard to distinguish friend from foe until it was too late. A woman burst from the underbrush nearby, clutching 2 small children. Behind her, a militia man raised his rifle. Suki's thrown knife took him in the throat before he could fire, but the sound of others approaching forced them all to move. "This way!" Jonas led them deeper into the swamp, where the ground grew treacherous with hidden sinkholes and quicksand. They could hear the sounds of battle spreading out around them. The militia had surrounded the entire area. Through a break in the cypress trees, Mabel caught a glimpse of the main force attacking the camp. Her heart stopped as she saw a militia officer on horseback, holding something small wrapped in a familiar blanket. Her baby, used as a shield against any Maroon marksman who might take aim at the officers. "No!" She surged forward, but Dinah and Suki caught her, dragging her back into cover as bullets whizzed past. The officer disappeared into the chaos, taking her child with him. By nightfall, the militia had pulled back toward the plantation, carrying their captives as bargaining chips. Mabel's baby, too small to travel with soldiers marching through the swamp, was handed back to the Whitfield household, his cries echoing through the big house as a reminder of the master's power. They ran until their lungs burned, using every trick Jonas had taught them to avoid the searching militia. They crossed their own tracks, doubled back through deep water, and left false trails. The sounds of fighting grew more distant, though the occasional gunshot still echoed through the trees. Finally, in a small hollow hidden by hanging moss and rotting logs, they stopped. Around them gathered the scattered survivors, less than half of those who had fought so bravely the night before. Many were wounded. All were grieving for those left behind. Dinah moved among them, checking injuries with hands that shook from exhaustion and rage. Her healer's knowledge, so long used to save lives, now assessed which warriors could still fight. Every face she touched bore the same expression: shock at the betrayal, fear for their captured kin, and underneath it all, a burning need for vengeance. Whispers spread among the survivors that it was Caleb, a house servant too fearful to share their fate, who had run to Whitfield with word of the revolt. He was nowhere to be found after the militia's retreat, vanished like smoke. neither punished nor forgiven, only remembered with bitterness. Mabel sat alone, staring at nothing, the torn piece of blanket clutched in her fingers. Suke paced like a caged animal, her dark eyes promising death to those who had betrayed them. Jonas stood watch, his face carved from stone as he listened to the distant sounds of his camp being destroyed. The morning sun climbed higher, its heat beginning to press down through the tree canopy. Steam rose from the swamp waters, creating a ghostly shroud around the hidden survivors. The weight of their losses hung heavy in the air. Friends dead, children taken, sanctuary destroyed. Dinah finished tending the last of the wounded. She moved to the center of their hiding place, her voice barely a whisper, but carrying to every ear. "This is not over," she said, steel in her tone. "They think they've beaten us. They think we'll run and hide like frightened animals, but we're not finished. Not while they hold our people. Not while they draw breath." Thunder rolled across the swamp as rain poured through the cypress canopy in heavy sheets. Dinah, Mabel, and Suki huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of palmetto leaves, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the ground beneath them into thick mud and filling the air with a bone-deep chill. Mabel sat between her friends, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she clutched a small piece of cloth, torn from her baby's blanket, in trembling fingers. The fabric was soaked through, but she refused to let it go. Her eyes were red and swollen, staring unseeing into the stormy darkness. "We should attack now," Suki muttered, her voice tight with barely contained fury. "While this rain covers our movements, they won't expect us to come in weather like this." She gripped her knife, knuckles white around the handle. The blade still carried dried blood from their earlier fighting. Dinah shook her head, water streaming down her face. "That's exactly what they want us to do. Rush in blind, desperate. They'll cut us down before we get within sight of the house." Her usual calm voice held an edge of exhaustion and grief. She'd spent the last hours trying to save those wounded in the militia's attack, losing too many despite her skills. "So, we do nothing?" Suki spat. "Hide here like rats while they hurt our people? While they have Mabel's child?" She stood suddenly, causing their shelter to sway dangerously. "I won't wait to die in this swamp." "Sit down," Dinah commanded, though gentler than her words suggested. "You're not thinking clearly. None of us are. We need what?" Suki paced in the rain, heedless of the mud sucking at her feet. "Need to plan? Need to be patient? How many more will die while we're being patient?" Mabel's fingers tightened on the cloth, her whisper barely audible over the storm. "My baby." The words seemed to catch in her throat. "He's so small. He must be so scared." Dinah wrapped an arm around Mabel's shoulders, drawing her closer. "We'll get him back. All of them. But we have to be smart about it." She looked up at Suki, still pacing like a caged animal. "You know I'm right. We're too few now. Too weak. We need something more than just our strength." Thunder cracked overhead, making them all jump. The sound reminded Suki of the militia's guns, and she dropped back down beside her friends, her anger momentarily replaced by remembered fear. Then what? What do we have left to fight with? Dinah was quiet for a long moment, listening to the rain drum against their shelter. Her eyes scanned the swamp around them, the treacherous mud, the hidden pools of stagnant water, the thick vines hanging like nooses from the trees. Slowly, a different kind of wisdom settled over her features, not the healer's knowledge she was known for, but something darker, born of desperation. "We have this," she said, gesturing to the swamp. "We know these waters, these paths. We know where the quicksand lies, where the water moccasins nest, where the ground looks solid, but will swallow a man whole." Suki's pacing stopped as understanding dawned in her eyes. "Make the swamp fight for us. The militia men are strangers here," Dinah continued, her voice growing stronger. They follow roads, straight lines. They think like soldiers, not like people who've lived with these waters all their lives. Mabel stirred slightly, her first real movement in hours. "The sinkhole," she whispered. "Past the 3 bent cypresses. I've seen deer disappear there, never to come up again." "Yes," Dinah nodded. "And the snake beds near the old lightning-struck oak. The deep mud pools by the fallen logs. All of it." "We could lead them in," Suki said, dropping to her knees beside them, energy returning to her voice. "Make them chase us down false trails, right into the worst places." "Split them up," Dinah agreed. "Let the swamp thin their numbers before we even have to fight them. They'll be lost, tired, afraid, everything we're not." Rain continued to pour around them as they huddled closer, their voices dropping to whispers as the plan took shape. Suki described hiding places she'd found during their weeks of preparation, spots where they could appear and vanish like ghosts in the mist. Mabel, though still clutching her baby's blanket, spoke of hidden paths through the deepest water, ways to move unseen while mounted men floundered. "We'll need to spread word to the others," Dinah said. "Those who escaped, who are hiding in other parts of the swamp. We'll need everyone to know the plan, to help herd the militia where we want them." "Let me go," Suki offered immediately. "I can move fastest, find the others before dawn." "Not alone," Dinah cautioned. "The militia will have patrols out, even in this weather. Take 2 others. Better to be sure the message gets through." Mabel's fingers worried at the wet cloth in her hands. "What about the house? The children?" Her voice broke on the last word. "Once the militia is scattered, lost in the swamp," Dinah assured her, "the house will be nearly empty. They'll have to leave men behind to guard it, but not many. That's when we strike. When they're divided, confused, searching the swamp for ghosts." Lightning split the sky, illuminating their faces in harsh white light. In that brief flash, their expressions were transformed, grief giving way to purpose, despair hardening into determination. The thunder that followed seemed to seal their pact, nature itself witnessing their decision. The rain continued to fall, but now it felt less like nature's persecution and more like cover for their plans. Each drop that fell would make the mud deeper, the footing more treacherous for those who didn't know these waters like they did. The storm that had seemed to mirror their despair now promised to be their ally in the fight to come. Dawn crept over the swamp like a gray shroud, the mist clinging low to the dark water. Hidden among the cattails, Dinah pressed herself deeper into the mud, barely breathing as the sound of dogs grew closer. Beside her, Suki and Mabel lay equally still, their bodies camouflaged with swamp muck and crushed leaves. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cypress trees just as the militia appeared. Their boots splashed through shallow water, horses nickering nervously at the unfamiliar terrain. Dogs strained at their leashes, confused by the overwhelming sense of rot and stagnant water. "Spread out," the militia captain ordered, his voice carrying across the water. "They can't have gone far. Find those women." Dinah exchanged silent glances with her companions. They had spent the night preparing, marking safe paths with broken reeds that only their eyes could recognize. Now they watched as the soldiers divided into smaller groups, exactly as planned. The first screams came within minutes. 2 soldiers, walking too close to what looked like solid ground, suddenly plunged into a sinkhole. Their terrified shouts echoed across the swamp as the mud pulled them under. Their companions rushed to help, only to find themselves sinking as well. "Stay back!" someone yelled. "It's quicksand!" Panic rippled through the militia ranks. Horses reared, throwing riders into the murky water. Men scrambled backward, abandoning their sinking comrades to save themselves. The dogs, sensing danger, began howling and pulling away from the swamp's edge. Mabel pointed silently to the left, where another group of soldiers was approaching the snake-filled hollow by the lightning-struck oak. They had carefully herded water moccasins into that area the night before, using long poles to guide the deadly reptiles into a natural basin. The snakes struck without warning. Men screamed as fangs found flesh, their boots offering no protection against the angry serpents. Horses thrashed and bolted, throwing more riders into the treacherous water. The sound of gunfire exploded across the swamp as soldiers shot blindly at the water, trying to hit the snakes, but only adding to the chaos. "Help!" voices called out in different directions. "Over here! We need help!" But those who tried to help their companions often met similar fate. A soldier rushing to aid his snake-bitten friend stepped into a carefully disguised pit, impaling himself on sharpened stakes. Another, backing away from the quicksand, stumbled into a deep pool and disappeared beneath the dark surface. Dinah watched it all with grim satisfaction. The swamp was doing their work for them, wearing down the militia's numbers and resolve. She could see fear replacing confidence in the soldiers' faces as nature itself seemed to turn against them. From their hidden positions, the women and their allies began their own attacks. Suki led a group that emerged from the mist like spirits, striking with clubs and knives before melting back into the shadows. Mabel directed others to cut off escape routes, herding panicked soldiers toward more traps. A soldier stumbled near Dinah's position, his uniform soaked and muddy. She could see the terror in his eyes as he looked wildly around, trying to find solid ground. When he stepped into another patch of quicksand, his scream was cut short as Dinah's people emerged from hiding, pushing him further in with long poles. The militia captain tried to rally his men, but his voice shook with fear. "Stand your ground! They're just women, just slaves!" But his words rang hollow as more screams echoed across the water. The swamp had become a nightmare landscape of hidden dangers and ghostly attackers. Men who had marched in confidently now fled in terror, leaving weapons and equipment behind as they splashed desperately toward solid ground. Suki's laugh, low and vengeful, carried across the water as another soldier disappeared into a pit. The sound seemed to unnerve the remaining militiamen even more than the screams of their companions. The dogs, usually so fierce in pursuit of runaways, now whimpered and refused to advance. Their handlers cursed and pulled at the leashes, but the animals knew better than to enter the death trap the swamp had become. By mid-morning, the militia's organized search had devolved into a chaotic retreat. Small groups of soldiers stumbled through the water, calling out to each other in panic. Many were wounded by snakes or makeshift weapons, while others simply disappeared beneath the dark surface of the swamp, pulled down by unseen hands or natural hazards. Dinah watched as the captain finally sounded the retreat. His horn call was shaky, fear evident in every note. The surviving soldiers didn't need to be told twice. They fled toward dry land, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Horses galloped past, many without riders, their eyes wide with terror. As the sounds of retreat faded, Dinah slowly rose from her hiding place. Around her, other figures emerged from the mist and shadows, their people, unharmed, while the swamp had decimated their pursuers. She counted quickly. Nearly half the militia force was gone, lost to quicksand, snakes, or sharpened stakes. Suki appeared at her side, dark satisfaction in her eyes. "The swamp fought for us today," she said quietly, like it was waiting all these years to help set things right. Mabel joined them, her face set with determination. "The house will be nearly empty now," she whispered. "Most of their fighters are dead in the water or running scared." Dinah nodded, looking toward where the plantation house would be, beyond the cypress trees. The morning mist was beginning to burn away, revealing a clear path back to where their vengeance had begun. She reached down and picked up a torch they had prepared the night before, its wrappings still dry despite the swamp's dampness. With a silent gesture, she signaled to their people. It was time for the final act, to burn away the last symbol of their bondage. One by one, stragglers emerged from the mist, wounded men leaning on makeshift crutches, women carrying children who had hidden during the battle. By the time the three women counted, nearly 24 had gathered again, scarred but unbroken, enough to strike one last blow. As they began their march out of the swamp, others emerged from hiding to join them. A small army born from desperation and forged in the crucible of the swamp's dangers. Night settled over the plantation like a velvet shroud, broken only by the glint of torches moving through the darkness. Dinah led the way, her face set in grim determination, as their group emerged from the swamp's edge. Behind her, 24 figures moved like shadows, carrying makeshift weapons and bundles of oil-soaked rags. The mansion stood eerily quiet, its windows gleaming in the moonlight. Most of the guards were dead in the swamp or had fled with the militia, leaving only a handful of house servants and the master's family inside. The time for revenge had come. Mabel broke away first, moving silently toward the servants' entrance she knew would lead to the nursery. Her heart pounded with each step, hands trembling as she thought of her baby. Suke covered her approach, a burning torch held high like a beacon of destruction. "Remember," Dinah whispered to their followers, "free anyone who wants freedom, but no mercy for those who chose to be our jailers." The others nodded, spreading out to surround the house. Inside, Mabel crept through familiar corridors, staying low and listening for movement. She heard voices from the master's study, Whitfield's angry tones mixing with his wife's frightened protests. But she ignored them, focused only on reaching her child. The nursery door was unlocked. Inside, her baby lay crying in his cradle, the cloth marker she'd left still tied to the wooden bars. Tears streamed down Mabel's face as she lifted him, pressing kisses to his forehead. "Mama's here," she whispered. "Mama's got you now." Outside, Suki had reached the front of the mansion. With a fierce grin, she thrust her torch through an open window, catching the heavy damask curtains. The fabric ignited instantly, flames racing up toward the ceiling. She moved to the next window, and the next, leaving trails of fire in her wake. Dinah directed the others to the outbuildings, the overseer's house, the storage sheds, the stables. Soon flames bloomed everywhere, turning night into savage day. The crack of burning wood mixed with shouts of alarm from inside the mansion. "Fire! Fire!" The cry went up, followed by the sound of running feet and slamming doors. House servants poured out, some carrying valuables they'd grabbed in their panic. Dinah's people surrounded them, offering escape to those who would join them, subduing any who resisted. Master Whitfield appeared at the front door, coughing from the smoke. His wife clung to his arm, her fine dress already smudged with soot. They tried to run, but found themselves surrounded by former slaves bearing torches and axes. "Please," Whitfield begged, his usual arrogance crumbling. "We treated you well, better than most masters." Suki stepped forward, holding her torch high so he could see the burn scars on her face. "Better," she spat. "You call this better?" She thrust the flame toward him, making him stumble backward into the burning house. The fire spread rapidly now, racing along wooden floors and up wallpapered walls. Smoke poured from every window, as the mansion became a furnace. Whitfield and his wife retreated inside, trying to find another way out, but flames blocked every exit. Mabel emerged from the servants' entrance, her baby clutched safely to her chest. She joined Dinah and Suki, watching as their former prison burned. The child, seemingly understanding the moment's significance, had stopped crying and stared at the flames with wide eyes. The enslaved people gathered in the yard, their faces lit by the inferno. Some wept, others laughed. Many simply stood in stunned silence as years of torment were reduced to ash. The sound of cracking timber and shattering glass filled the air. Through a second-floor window, they could see the master and his wife trapped by the flames. Whitfield's face appeared briefly, contorted with terror as he realized there was no escape. His screams joined the fire's roar, then faded into the crackling blaze. The heat became intense, forcing everyone to move back. Sparks flew into the night sky like vengeful stars, carried on waves of superheated air. The roof began to cave in, sending up a fountain of embers that rained down around them. Dinah moved among their people, organizing them into groups. Some would head north toward freedom. Others would join the Maroons in the swamp. A few, like herself and her companions, would move deeper into the wilderness to start a new life far from any master's reach. The fire spread to the fields, turning dried cotton plants into rivers of flame. Years of brutal labor went up in smoke as the plantation's wealth burned away. No one moved to stop it. This was more than destruction. It was purification. Mabel's baby had fallen asleep against her shoulder, peaceful despite the chaos around them. She adjusted her grip, keeping him turned away from the worst of the smoke. Suki stood beside her, one hand resting protectively on the child's back. Through the night, they watched it burn, bearing witness to the end of their captivity. The flames consumed everything: whips, chains, account books recording human beings as property. The fire erased it all, leaving only ashes to mark where their prison had stood. As dawn approached, the mansion collapsed in on itself with a thunderous roar. Sparks exploded upward one final time, then began to fade. Smoke still rose from the ruins, but the fierce flames had died down to smoldering embers. Dinah looked at her companions, Mabel cradling her child, Suki still gripping her torch. They had entered the punishment shed as victims, but emerged as warriors. Now they stood as free women, their chains broken not just in body, but in spirit. Around them, their followers began to move off in different directions, each group seeking their own path to freedom. Some carried small bundles of food and clothing, others nothing but hope and determination. All of them walked with straight backs and raised heads, no longer bowed by slavery's weight. Dinah, Suki, and Mabel turned together toward the cypress line, the child warm against Mabel's chest. "We'll build again, quiet, hidden, stronger," Dinah said, already naming medicines and roots in her head. Suki lifted her chin. "And if they come, the swamp will remember us." Mabel kissed her son's brow. "He will only know freedom." The three slipped into the trees as the ash settled behind them. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.